firms in Pennsylvania, and he is chairman of the Estates and Trusts Practice Group. Cliff concentrates his practice in the areas of estate planning, closely held business succession planning, administration of estates and trusts, probate law, and new tax law. Cliff is also a fellow of the American College of Trust and Estate Counsel. He's a frequent author and lecturer on estate planning and transfer tax-related topics. Cliff is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School and received his J.D. from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. He is also a CPA in New York State. Cliff, this is really something that's near and dear to my heart, is the immediate past president of the Philadelphia Estate Planning Council. This is an organization, one of the premier organizations in the country, consisting of over 1,000 attorneys, accountants, insurance professionals, bank and trust company professionals, and other estate planning professionals. And I, as a member of that council, have had the pleasure of working with Cliff and have appreciated his great leadership. Cliff, welcome to 80/20 Estate Planning.
Glad to be here, Al.
Great. We also will have Mr. Brian Titus. I'm not sure if Brian is on yet. It doesn't appear that he will be. He will be soon. Brian is Vice President of Advanced Marketing of Phoenix Home Life in Hartford, Connecticut, where he provides tax and legal support to many of the top life insurance professionals in the industry. As you've heard me say before on this program, Phoenix Home Life is one of the premier life insurance companies that I'm able to work with, and I appreciate my relationship with them. Brian is a frequent speaker at industry and company meetings and is a regular contributor to industry publications. He's a graduate of Trinity College in Hartford and University of Connecticut Law School. He also holds an LLM in taxation and is both a CLU and a ChFC. As a matter of fact, Brian is currently at a national meeting for the Society of Financial Service Professionals and will join us in a few minutes from Las Vegas, where the national conference is. And Cliff, we're at our respective locations, but we're not in Las Vegas.
That's correct.
Okay. We are going to talk today, Cliff, about estate planning and business continuation planning for business owners. And this is really a meaty topic. There's an awful lot to cover, and we're going to actually dedicate 2 shows to it. One of the reasons, Cliff, that I wanted you to be with me today on this program is I know that this is an area that you absolutely love in your practice. Why is that?
Well, Al, there's a couple of reasons, but the primary reason is that there's an opportunity to deal with non-tax issues in a very important way so that you can help the family to preserve an asset which is so important to the nature of the family and isn't just controlled by the tax issues. So much of what goes into the planning for family businesses ties into the family dynamics, the relationships between the different family members, and by blending the tax expertise and some family dynamics, human relations, you really can achieve some very positive results.
Cliff, on our first show of this series, we talked about estate planning in general, and we talked about the estate tax issue. And I think you're bringing up a very important point here. While family businesses may come to you initially because of the perceived danger of the estate tax, I think what you're telling us is that there are myriad of other reasons why people end up doing this planning.
That is absolutely correct. And too often we see situations where clients come to us having been through the experience of doing some planning where the planner was only focused on the tax aspects or the legal aspects and letting those items wag the dog, in effect, the tail wagging the dog, instead of taking the time to listen and to drill down and see what's really going on here, what are the true objectives, what's some of the baggage that goes along in this family relationship. Without understanding that background, any plan is more likely to fail than to succeed because you're just not laying the proper groundwork.
Well, is Brian with us yet? I guess he's not.
Yes, I'm on.
Oh, Brian, welcome.
Thank you.
We've already given you a great introduction, by the way. I'm sorry you missed it. But I did tell our listeners that while Cliff and I are in Philadelphia, you are in sunny Las Vegas.
Correct.
Working.
So I want the record to reveal that this is a meeting. Yeah.
Okay, well, we mentioned that. So I want to come back to what Cliff was saying. Cliff, I know that one of your great skills, among the many things that you do well, is this whole issue of human relations, interpersonal relationships, and dealing with family dynamics. When you first meet a client, or maybe it's a newer client that you've had some experience with, how much, in relationship to the parts of the planning process, how much time is spent on finding out the true facts of what's going on in that family and what the goals really are? Do you spend a lot of time in those areas?
The answer is yes. And oftentimes what I will try to do is, if possible, have a meeting with as many of the family members as possible present initially, but then have an opportunity to meet with the matriarch or the patriarch alone, try to get a sense as to what they want to try to accomplish, and then meet with each of the individual members of the family and really just get a sense as to what's their agenda, what are they concerned about, what are they looking for. So that, again, you really get a better sense as to how the different pieces will fit together and see if you can help to develop a plan or a pattern that meets the needs of a number of the different family members.
Now, Brian, to follow up on what Cliff is saying here, you often get called into a process that has already begun, and you must deal with this sort of fact-finding or discovery portion of the plan, and you must see the results, either those people who do it well and others who don't do it necessarily well. What's your experience in that area?
Well, certainly that we in the insurance business, and I have shared the perspective of Cliff and also come from a little different perspective, but we in the insurance business have a great deal of interest in this area. And we find the producers who deal in this area have various levels of experience, and the producer that can bring more help, more advice, more to the table, so to speak, in any particular case is certainly an asset to any business owner who's doing this kind of planning. And it's as I said, it's quite important to us because in most cases, business owners need cash. They need liquidity at some point in time, usually at a death. And whether or not that involves estate taxes remains to be seen. But if the planning is done right, then the needs will kind of unfold and themselves, and the solutions will become a little bit more apparent if the planning is done correctly and the right kind of groundwork is laid.
And picking up on what Brian just said, oftentimes what I've found is if there isn't enough discussion about why the planning is being done and what the end game is, the plan gets presented, maybe draft documents get prepared and delivered for review, but many times the plan actually does not get implemented because the clients don't understand what the reasons are for doing it.
You know, I'm intrigued here by something that Brian just said in terms of liquidity. And I want to bring this, Cliff, to you in your practice every day. We used to have an old saying, and I'm not so sure if it's true anymore, but would you say that money does solve most of the problems in planning for family businesses?
No. Okay. What I would say is that money is an important element, but and as Brian correctly pointed out, there are liquidity issues in the event of death. There may be liquidity issues in terms of the operation of the business or someone's disability. But very often what is integral in the family business is control. And who's in control, who has the ability to dictate what someone's job description is, family members on both sides, whether someone is getting a distribution of cash or who's getting certain benefits or perks. So I think control is a very important aspect to the planning.
Yeah. Is that what you run into, Brian?
Oh, sure,
and
sure.
Are we looking at techniques, Brian and Cliff, to make that happen?
Well, sure, and I would certainly agree with the notion that liquidity, cash at the appropriate time, is one element of this, but there's so much else that goes into the transfer of successful transfer of a business, and as we know, that doesn't take place very often. There's so much else that goes into it. You certainly don't want the lack of liquidity to be the thing that brings everything down, but by the same token, that's no guarantee that that's going to be mark the successful transfer of a business.
Is the liquidity actually, as I'm thinking about this, liquidity is sort of the easy part. Is it not? I mean, business owners can always, in a sense, go out and buy money or make provisions for liquidity or buy insurance. That seems to be sort of a fundamental that you can do some planning. You can see that there's a need for liquidity, so you can buy the money, but often you can't buy the ambition, the talents, the skills, the mindset, the political dimensions that you need.
The answer is, in many cases, it is. You can solve the liquidity issues. Obviously, there are issues involving insurability. There are issues involving current cash flow and whether or not the clients or the business can cover the cost of the insurance that's needed out of current cash flow without affecting the operation of the business. There are also other techniques out there, obviously, to help defer or defray the cost. So there are different ways to deal with the liquidity issue, insurance being an important attribute.
Well, what I'd like to do, and maybe we'll do this right after a break, is let's come back, let's talk about some of the concerns that business owners have. Let's talk about what this business really means in terms of their lives, and then maybe we can get to some of the planning that's actually done to help in the transfer of the business. So let's handle that right after the break.
80/20 Estate Planning will return after these short messages. Mortality. Who dwells on it? But when it comes to planning your estate, it's never too early to start. For smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, you need to hear Al Gibbons, creator of the heralded 80/20 Estate Plan. Implement 80% of the planning you need in 20% of the time it normally takes, from A to Z in 60 days. Contact AEG Financial Services today at 610-917-8940 or email them at algibbons@algibbons.com for more information about Al's expert services and related products. Al Gibbons of AEG Financial Services is a highly respected expert in the complicated and often confusing world of estate planning. Put his years of experience in dealing with real situations to work for you. Contact AEG Financial Services today. Call 610-917-8940. That's 610-917-8940 or email algibbons@algibbons.com. Are you looking for free, accurate, and objective information regarding investments? How about non-biased opinions with 25 years of experience to draw from? Then Tom Prabillo has the information for you, and it's all on his website, www.prabillofinancial.com. The completely independent advice given on this website can help small businesses make sound decisions which can lead to growth and further success. And in regards to investments, whether you're a novice or small investor, this website has the information you need. So call Prabillo Financial today. Sound, objective, and experienced advice at 1-800-854-7847. That's 1-800-854-7847. Or visit their website at www.prabillofinancial.com. That's www.prybylofinancial.com.
Today's money, it's not just who you are, it's what you're made of. It's not just having a name, it's making one. Not just being, but creating. In fact, 8 out of 10 today's millionaires aren't inheriting their money, they're earning it. That's not just evolution, that's revolution. And one company understands how money has changed, and that company is Phoenix. Call 1-888-456-3451 or visit us at phoenixwm.com, because money is not what it used to be.
Set your dial to 990 AM every Friday from 11 to 12 p.m. for Let's Talk PC with your host, Mark Krakowski. During this informative and entertaining hour, Mark will cover the most current computer technologies ranging from PC hardware, software, troubleshooting, and installations. So whether you're just a casual computer user or a serious technology buff, this show has something for everyone. So tune in every Friday from 11 to 12 p.m. for Let's Talk PC, right here on your talk alternative, 990 AM.
Talk to our expert host. In the Providence area, call 621-WALE. Outside the Providence area, call toll-free, 1-877-621-WALE.
And now back to 80/20 estate planning. Here's your host, estate planning expert, Al Gibbons.
Welcome back. My name is Al Gibbons, hosting the program, and very happy to have my guests, Brian Titus from Phoenix Home Life and Cliff Schlesinger from Wolf Block in Philadelphia. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Let's talk about some of the real important issues to business owners. I have to imagine there are an awful lot of emotional issues. This is really an important asset. Brian, what do you see out there? What are some of the most important things that you see when cases are brought to you?
Well, I think that probably one of the there are a myriad of challenges for the business owner, but probably one of the more emotional ones and financial ones in many cases is the situation where the business owner has a child or two that's actively involved in the business with him or her, and other children who are not. And so on the emotional side, it seems that the business owner has to grapple with the notion of turning the business over to the children, who to turn it over to. Sometimes maybe the choice of the active children isn't all that obvious to the owner, and also how to deal with the other children equitably and whatever equitably might mean to the owner. So one of the real tough issues that has both emotional and economic consequences is how do you deal with that particular situation. That I find to be one of the more challenging ones.
And Cliff, is that a common theme for some of the cases that you work on?
Yes, and I would agree with Brian. I think that those tend to present the most difficult, oftentimes the most difficult situations, if there are not other sufficient liquid assets outside of the business to try to compensate the children who are not in the business fairly and leave the business to those children who are active in the business.
So in many cases, it would seem to me that it's not abnormal that when we're talking about what a business means to an owner, it can often be the largest portion of the estate. It can certainly, especially in light of the stock market today, could be the most valuable asset in the estate. It is a primary source of income. It's a source of retirement income, which I think could complicate things. The family's financial future has been involved with it and will continue to be involved with it. I mean, these are heavy issues.
No doubt about it. And also, most business owners, entrepreneurs who have been successful are used to putting money back into the business and view it as, the investment that they have the greatest ability to try to control. And so you're right that a lot of times the assets are tied up either directly in the business or in the real estate and buildings that the business occupies, so that very often there are not sufficient liquid assets outside the business to take care of children who are not in the business.
Yeah, and Al, there's one other, among other issues, is that I suppose there are business owners who never plan to retire, don't want to retire, and probably be carried out, feet first. We've seen those tales before, but others who do want to. And I think it's sometimes particularly difficult for a small business owner to know how to get out of a business. It's not always that easy to do, easier said than done. But you could find owners with very varying interests and thinking about that particular issue as well.
It has been my experience. It is not unusual, Cliff and Brian, to run into the owner of a family business, as you've just said, Brian, who doesn't necessarily look to make investments elsewhere, but invest continually back in the business. So in some cases, you don't see very large retirement plans and so forth. This business is sort of the whole life. And Cliff, when you put that with some of the liquidity issues you were talking about, you're really sort of betwixt and between in some of these businesses and passing them down, because now it almost has to provide a retirement income for the founder, and yet there has to be enough cash inside to support the business.
That's correct, and it's not just retirement for the founder, but for the founder's spouse as well.
Right.
And one of the things that I try to do when getting involved in the planning is to, again, help people take a step back and say, what are some of the objectives? Obviously, one is trying to continue the business and pass it down, but the other relates to liquidity, retirement income, and all of that has to be addressed in order to develop an appropriate and effective plan.
Yeah, and you bring up this issue of the spouse, and then it seems to me you have further complications. Is the spouse actively, importantly involved in the business, or has the spouse been doing other things outside the business and yet is involved only in the sense that he or she is the spouse?
That's right. And if, for example, the business is in corporate form and the family, the patriarch, the owner of the majority of the stock, dies with that stock and leaves those assets to spouse or in trust for spouse, is spouse then going to be in a controlling position? Will he or she, the surviving spouse, want to change some of the plans that the decedent was trying to put into place?
Right. Brian, thoughts?
No, I agree. I mean, often I think probably of the older generation business owners, if I can put it that way, in most cases probably the spouse was not actively involved. I'm not so sure that's true in the current generation, but certainly the older generation wasn't actively involved. And while a business owner may plan to work forever, in a sense, and can always derive an income, it's not always very clear what happens on the death of the owner. How does the spouse get support? And in many cases, I think the spouses do not want to play an active role yet in the management of the business, yet providing adequate support to the spouse is sometimes difficult to do. So it's a very important issue to deal with as soon as possible, as soon as it's practicable.
Cliff, one of the things that I know you do really well is that you're able to get your clients through the process. And yet, in our discussion today, and we've all been involved in these kinds of situations, there is so much at stake, and it can get so complicated. How do you get people through the process? Isn't there sort of a feeling of being overwhelmed, and how do you get people through this?
It's an excellent point, Al, and that is I try to break it down to very simple, discrete parts and try to deal with laying the initial foundation first and make sure that everybody understands what the first steps are, buys into them, accomplishes them before we move forward to start to lay additional floors or layers onto the plan. For example, oftentimes the starting point is to look at the parents and make sure they have appropriate wills in place and powers of attorney and living wills, and then get those planning techniques in place before turning to the shareholders agreement and other important and gifting patterns that have to be addressed.
So, Cliff, do I hear you right then? You sort of work from the large perspective first, the biggest issues first, and you sort of work your way down to the details and make sure that they're integrated and everything comes out in the end?
That's correct.
Okay. I'd like to talk more about that. I think that is such an important issue. Brian and Cliff, let's take a break right now. We'll come back right after, and I want to pick this up where we left off.
80/20 Estate Planning will return after these short messages. Mortality. Who dwells on it? But when it comes to planning your estate, it's never too early to start. For smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, you need to hear Al Gibbons, creator of the heralded 80/20 Estate Plan. Implement 80% of the planning you need in 20% of the time it normally takes, from A to Z in 60 days. Contact AEG Financial Services today at 610-917-8940 or email them at algibbons@algibbons.com for more information about Al's expert services and related products. Al Gibbons of AEG Financial Services is a highly respected expert in the complicated and often confusing world of estate planning. Put his years of experience in dealing with real situations to work for you. Contact AEG Financial Services today. Call 610-917-8940. That's 610-917-8940 or email algibbons@algibbons.com.
Hi, this is Bill Maher, Politically Incorrect, asking you not to let your medical or science education go to the dogs, or rabbits, rats, or other animals for that matter. There are great new ways to learn that don't involve animals at all. For more information, contact the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine at 202-686-2210 or on the web at pcrm.org.
Join Elliot Lloyd Lanes every Thursday at 3 p.m. for the Viable Solutions Hour. In that hour, you will gain insight on successfully identifying and implementing reliable, effective business collaboration systems. Reliable and effective, tantamount in today's high-speed, high-competition business environment, Mr. Lanes is no stranger to that scenario. 15 years as head of Viable Solutions, Inc., Elliot Lanes has the experience and the expertise to cut through the jargon and deliver the goods in an understandable, easygoing way. So tune in Thursdays, 3 to 4 p.m., right here on your talk alternative, WALE 990 AM, Renaissance Radio.
Money. It's just not what it used to be. Among other things, it's younger. But new money and old money have at least one thing in common. Phoenix, a company that's been helping people manage wealth for nearly 150 years. Phoenix understands that making money and knowing what to do with it are two very different skills. Call 1-888-456-3451 or visit us at phoenixwm.com. We could bring harmony to your life, if not to your music.